in celebration of National Canadian Film Day. So my name is Darren DeRoche, and I'm the manager of the IMAX Theatre at TELUS World of Science in Edmonton. Co-hosting with me is Ryan Halota, Vice President of Operations at the Saskatchewan Science Centre.
I hope that many of you have had a chance to view Wonders of the Arctic. But if you haven't yet, the film is available for free today. Just visit your local Science Centre or museum's website to find the link. Tonight, we're going to take a journey to some of the coldest, most remote places in Canada. This is going to be a highly interactive event, so if you have any questions for our presenter,
Alberta Region 4, and we recognize these lands as the traditional and contemporary homes of many Indigenous peoples. Now it's my pleasure to welcome our special guest, David Lickley. So David is a scientist turned filmmaker with a master's degree in biology from the University of Alberta and over 40 nature films and science documentaries to his credit. His interest in natural history has led to a strong conservation ethic in many of his films and a desire to bring wildlife and other science-related topics to a wider audience through IMAX and other multimedia formats. So welcome, David.
Thanks for having me.
So, David, can you tell us about your early career and how you came to find yourself making IMAX films for Science North?
Well, Ryan, it's a bit of the long and winding road to get to this point, but if you could pull up slide number 2, I will use some pictures to help tell you the story of how I got to what I'm doing now. So basically, the short story is that I began as a folk singer back in the 70s, and an unsuccessful one. I mean, I didn't really get very far on that career, but I managed to get a job one summer when I was about 19 years old up in Northern Ontario at a park. And my job was to go up and help the naturalist program by doing campfires. Because I didn't know anything about birds and trees, so I became the campfire guy. And so I started writing songs about the park, and I ended up recording some of these songs up there, and they got noticed. And one thing led to another. Next thing I knew, I was making soundtracks for other parks' films throughout the system. So I kind of started in the music side, but at the same time, I was inoculated by these naturalists I was working with, and they were bird experts and plant people, and I decided to go back to university and study biology. So when I wasn't going up north to play guitar, I was at Acadia for a while, and then I ended up at the University of Alberta. I did a master's in biology and studied ground squirrels. And of course, because I had some experience with films by doing soundtracks for my various people back in Ontario, I convinced the university to give me a 16mm camera to go record the Columbian ground squirrel in the Kananaskis, which is where I was doing my study. So I just, we're out there in the field for 8 months and filming ground squirrels as they come up and pop down. And I spent 2 summers just filming as I felt like filming while I was studying them. And I took that footage to David Suzuki's program, Nature Things, at the end of the study. And I said, I have all this footage of ground squirrels. Are you guys interested in putting together a show? And despite my lack of experience filming, there was enough stuff in there that they decided they could make a 15-minute ground squirrel program. So they brought me on as the director, although I didn't really know what I was doing, but they gave me a great team of editors and writers, and we put together this episode of On the Columbian Ground Squirrel, which is somewhere out there in the ether still, I think, on the Columbian Ground Squirrel. And that kind of allowed me to, when I finished my master's, apply for a job at Science North in Sudbury, because they were opening a brand new science center. It's 1984. And they were looking for somebody with a science background. I have a master's in zoology and a film background. And I'd done enough film stuff, and I had this Nature Things episode to my credit that they hired me to become their resident producer at Science North. And so we started making small films. They became little bigger things, some theater things, some multimedia things. It was just a blast to make. And eventually we started to work in 3D because Science North had a 3D theater. It was really, as you might know, Science North is a huge theater-heavy science center. We have 5 of these major object theaters. We have a lot of video theaters. We have this 3D 70mm theater. But long before IMAX, we had this theater that was 70mm 3D. So I eventually got a chance to make a film for that. And lo and behold, there was IMAX people that brought their kids up to Sudbury on a school trip. They were from Toronto, and they got into these theaters, and they saw what we were doing, and they gave me a call, and they said, you know, you guys, you should be making IMAX films. And so that led to the first film I made, which was called Gold Fever. And that was back in '96. I started working on that, and I've been working on mostly IMAX ever since.
That's amazing.
Anybody can be doing this. That's what that tells you.
So,
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Darren.
what was it that attracted you to the Arctic? So why make a film about Canada's Arctic?
Well, we've done a lot of films up to that point. We did one on the Great Lakes, which is a great passion of mine, and of course in our backyard. We worked in Africa with Jim Goodall on chimpanzees. We did a bear film, which was kind of mostly black bear, grizzly bear, but also the polar bear. And when we were up doing the polar bear segment, it became apparent to us that this would be a really good topic to do a whole film on the Arctic. So we started planning this like almost 10 years before we went out to start filming. We were actually in the development phase, which for us means trying to raise money. And it took us that long to kind of get it all together. And so, you know, it wasn't designed to be a Canadian-only film, but in the end, we found we could get all the footage we needed in the Canadian Arctic, so that's where we focused our attention.
Besides being the director of the film, you also wrote it. And I think we've all heard stories about people making nature documentaries. You can write the film one way, and then, you know, sometimes nature doesn't behave the way that you expect it to. So did the story that you wrote sort of mirror what we see in the original film, or were there some things that kind of forced you to pivot along the way?
Well, that's a good question. If you could pull up slide 8, that's where I usually start this part of the story of the Arctic film. Is in slide 8 is basically a slide of an iceberg in the Arctic. But the one thing that it impressed me right from the start, and the way I kind of like to try to make films, is finding a theme. So you're given a topic like the Arctic. Well, it's kind of large, it's vast, you can go in so many different directions. But the theme was very clear to me that it would be about ice and the impact that ice has on the Arctic and how it shapes everything that's up there, and of course the trouble that ice is in right now. So starting with that as your topic, you're going to do a film about ice. We then went to slide 9, which is kind of the early days of our storyboard. So you kind of start thinking, well, what links to ice? You know, what are the stories you can link? And we got 40 minutes, so you're not going to do everything. But I started out with a fairly broad possibilities of things to link to ice. And being a writer of a film like this, really that means that what you're doing at the end is you're writing the narration, because all the way through it's basically this is my script. When you look at that slide, that's how I work as a script. It's not like I go out with anything that's pre-designed. Beyond, we're going to do a story about polar bears, we're going to do a story about whales, we're going to do a story about whatever it might be. So that's kind of what the scripting at the beginning is, and the real writing happens in the last few weeks when you start doing narration. But that was it. I mean, this is a storyboard. Now, of course, not everything works out, but you start with a broad brush, and then you just see what pieces fall together at the end.
I see. So, what were the main challenges when you started out heading up to the Arctic?
Well, it's if anybody in the audience has been to the Arctic, I mean, it's easier to go to India than it is to go to the Arctic from Sudbury. I mean, it's a hard place to get to. It's a hard place to move around once you're there. Basically, it's a bunch of tiny hamlets strung out over a vast area with huge weather issues trying to get in and out of places. So logistics is pretty tough in the Arctic. And so we spent a lot of time trying to figure out where we could get to, how we could get our gear and crew in there. Doing some seasonality things, because we did some stuff in the summer, we did some stuff in the dead of winter in February, which was a real challenge. But the thing about a storyboard is you sometimes start with what you know are going to be, I have like 8 things I might put into a film, of which 4 or 5 are going to make the final. One I knew would make the final was polar bears. I mean, you can't do a film on the Arctic, I think, without doing something for polar bears. And the place to do polar bears is Churchill, Manitoba. So that was our first shoot. We went out to Churchill, Manitoba. And if you could show me slide 10, you could pull up slide 10 for me. That shoot was very interesting because it was at the point where IMAX as a filmmaking medium was shifting from film into digital. And so up until then, the films I'd made on the Great Lakes and the Bears and Jim Goodall was all shot in film. It was all 1570 2D at that point. And the Arctic film was meant to be a 3D film, and it was just after we'd done Born to Be Wild where IMAX basically invented the first really practical 3D digital IMAX camera. So we took that into the jungles of Borneo and into Kenya to make that film and really tested the equipment to the point where we decided that was the gear to use up in Churchill, Manitoba. So if you can slide over to slide number 12, I'll show you what that stuff looks like, because it changed the way you make film. Especially the films I do are mostly natural history, and that's the things I study. That's what's my love, and that's the things I'm really comfortable with. And natural history, when you're filming in the IMAX film, you have a 3-minute magazine. And so trying to capture really dynamic animal behavior when you have a 3-minute window to capture it, and then you've got to spend 10 to 15 minutes changing your reel over your camera. It's really, you just got to get lucky. You really have to spend a lot of time and get lucky. The digital system that you see here, I mean, it's a totally different world. It's the Phantom system, so it was high-end digital. It was a very compact system, compact enough that if you go over to slide number 13, for the first time we were able to put it off of a crane. Because, you know, to get the 3D film rig that IMAX developed with 2 film cameras, well, it's actually one system, but it weighs close to 300 pounds. There's no crane that you can put off of a Tundra buggy in Churchill that will hold 300 pounds. This rig can get down to 60, 70 pounds, and it can actually hang off of your buggy. So you can get out and you can get close to the bears. And that was always the issue, I think, filming polar bears in Churchill was you're up on Tundra buggies, which are these big, terrain vehicles, because you have to be away from the bears. These aren't animals you're going to film on the ground. We have tried that, and nobody died, but it wasn't an easy thing to do. So you get a lot of shots where you're looking down at bears because you're a little higher than the bears, or looking out at bears, and it's really hard to get intimate shots of polar bears from a Tundra buggy when you're at Tundra buggy level. This crane allows us to drop the camera down, and there's a few shots in that film which to me are the real money shots where we were really at eye level with polar bears, and that camera is only 10 feet away from the bear, and we're all safe because we're up on the Tundra buggy. So I think that having that kind of technology available for this film is huge, and doing that bear shoot first gave us a confidence that we could do a film in the Arctic because we got amazing footage of polar bears.
That's very interesting. Some of the bear shots were some of my favorites. Where the bears are under the helicopter, very fascinating. I'm sure that's very fascinating story. One of the things that I loved about the film was how prominently a lot of the Indigenous peoples featured in the film. There were some great characters and stories in that. So were you expecting that when you went into the film, or how did their experiences inform the final product?
Well, that's a good question because I mean a lot of the stories don't reveal themselves until you get further into the project. So for fun, I'm going to go back to slide number 9. You can jump back to number 9 because this is my storyboard at the beginning of the project, right? And if you look at that, I'm going to pull that one up a little bit so I can see it better too.
There's the polar bear in the
polar bear. You got this historic ship. We were thinking of doing something on the Franklin at one point, or maybe the Amazon expedition, some historical thing up on the top left. There's icebreakers, and I went through the Northwest Passage on an icebreaker, thinking that could be a really good story. That in the end we weren't able to do it. There is in this scenario, there's really not a lot of Indigenous. There's one picture of Indigenous folks here because we knew we wanted to have some kind of inclusion, but we just had no idea how to do it and who the characters would be. And we spent 2 years getting the background footage and putting together a variety of different stories before we actually found our character. But we didn't find our character at the last moment. And that's not the way we like to do films. We like to kind of know who our central characters are early on, but we really didn't find anybody that we thought would be like that. And when we did, we found a really strong Indigenous connection to Clyde River in Baffin Island. And it was through a scientist who, I'm going to bring up a picture of that scientist that you know what she looks like from the movie, but Sherry Gearherd, who was in Clyde River, and I'm going to go all the way to 43. You go up to slide 43 for me. Yeah, so that's Ilko and Sherry. They became our central characters in the film. And again, we didn't find Sherry until about 6 months before the film was supposed to be released. So we were really late in the process. It was actually through a connection I made on the icebreaker going through the Northwest Passage. There was an anthropologist on there who said, "Oh, you should think about using this person, the scientist I know in Clyde River." And she lives in Clyde River. She's not like a grouse girl, like she pops up in the summer and does it up and then pops back down. That's what they call scientists up here, ground squirrels. She lives up there. She's a dog team. She's embedded in that. She's been there for like 14 years. So she is a real, she's really well connected to the community. And she works with the Indigenous folks. And she works on ice. And she works on understanding the science that the Inuit people bring in terms of their understanding of ice and weather. So it really was a perfect fit when we found her to the theme of ice and to the climate change issues we wanted to address, and really strong characters in Ilko, who became our central character.
Great.
So wildlife filming can be pretty unpredictable. What were some of the challenges you had capturing these polar bears or these whales in the film?
All right, so this is it almost sounds like a setup, doesn't it? I know it's not. We didn't talk about any of this, did we, Derek? But,
no.
Let's go to slide 15. Because when we started out, we knew we wanted to do, everything needed to connect to ice. So we had the ice bear. That was an obvious one. We wanted an ice whale. And so we wanted to focus on one of the Arctic whales that are really specific to the Arctic. I mean, they can be the narwhal, they can be the beluga, they can be bowhead. Whales that really are almost exclusively found in the Arctic. So we started out thinking it's going to be a story of either the beluga whale or the bowhead whale. And that's the picture you see here. And originally we thought it would be the beluga whale because we were so iconic in the Arctic. And if you go to Churchill in the summertime, you can see 40,000 beluga whales. They all they mass down at the bottom of Hudson's Bay during the summer months. And a lot of them can breed and give birth in the rivers down there. So we thought this would be a really easy story to do. We know we've been to Churchill to do the polar bears, so we knew the town. So we went back, and if you go to slide 16, so the idea was to go shoot beluga whales. So we flew up to Churchill with our gear, and this is the small portion of the gear we took up. And if you go over to slide 18 for me, you can see this is like you're flying over the southern part of Hudson's Bay, and you look down and these white things, they're all beluga whales. There's so many of them. You think, how can you miss? We're just have to get out there with these whales, and we're going to get some amazing footage. And if you go to slide 19, you'll see, we are very close to these whales. So we had an amazing shoot up there. It was about a 10-day shoot. Go to slide 20, and we were shooting everything because you have to from Zodiac. So we had, great pilots. We had a great support team. We went out and basically tried to film these beluga whales with the IMAX cameras from the Zodiacs. Well, the problem with Zodiac and problem with going on the ocean like this is, you see how choppy things are? It doesn't settle right down to calm water very often. And with our format, if you get into any kind of situation, whether it's bump or any kind of chop, it's really hard to get good wildlife footage because you have to have really steady stuff. So we filmed an amazing story of basically what I would call a beluga rodeo. Because the scientists up here, what they do is they go out in the Zodiacs and they jump out of the Zodiacs with these nets, and they net these belugas in very shallow water, and they tag them and they put these radio collar, they're small tags on the fins, and they're trying to track where they go because they want to know where these populations are overwintering. So they have to jump out of these boats, and they miss every they only hit 1 out of 3 times to actually get a net on a whale. When you do, you got this huge big whale. So then you have 5 people that are jumping in the water. You have vets jumping in there. It's a real crazy few minutes and a fantastic story. But it's all just so choppy. But in the end, we said, we've got a great story, but we really can't put this on the screen. It's not going to work. So we went to plan B. And so if you go to slide 21, plan B was to do the bowhead whale, which is a much more elusive whale. There's fewer of them in the Arctic. I remember seeing a film when I was much younger called In Search of the Bowhead Whale by Bill Mason, an NFB film. And it was a story of him trying to find a bowhead whale, like one. And so here we are 40 years later, we're going up to Penguin in Baffin Island, hoping that, the bowheads are going to be accessible to us when we're up there. And if you go to slide 22, we got incredibly lucky because normally the bowheads, they range over a huge amount in the Arctic. And they do come into this area of on the edge of Baffin Island. They come into Cumberland Sound. But they kind of spread out a bit and they tend to travel very fast. And so for us to try to film these whales and keep up with them and even get to where they are, it'd be really hard if that was open ocean. And so we got lucky in that there was a very unseasonable amount of ice that had drifted in to Cumberland Sound and basically clogged up the entire part. And this is still August, so it was clogged up with ice in this area. And so what it meant was, if you go to slide 23, I'll show you how much ice there was. It was basically hard for anybody to move around in this part of the Arctic in August, including the whales. They need to be able to surface to breathe, so they weren't able to leave the pockets of ocean and water that were still ice-free. So if you go to slide 24, so we're out in basically fairly calm water, with an ice pack all around us, and there is us and our camera, there are the scientists, and there's probably 200 whales, bowhead whales, that are kind of trapped in this environment with us. Now they can move a little further than we can, but slide 25, basically they weren't leaving this open water until the ice pack had all disappeared, or at least enough that they could travel through. So we were all together in this, not that big an area with this flat, calm water, because the great thing about ice is it knocks down all the waves. There isn't any swell. And we were able to film for a week with the scientists and with these whales. In fact, we were there about 10 days. And it was amazing. We had whales. It was like whales spouting left, whales spouting right. We were getting close to the whales. The scientists were there with us because we love scientists. I mean, we do a lot of science stories. But they don't always love us. As a film crew, you get to a lot of situations where they try to do the work and you're kind of in the way. And they tolerate you because they know it's good for science and good for their programs to have the programs in a film like ours. But on the other hand, they're trying to do the research and we're kind of a clumsy add-on that can really cause problems. And so if they could have, they would have left with these whales and gone across Cumberland Sound. But we would have had a hard time catching up, staying with them, trying to camp in the middle of nowhere. It would have been really a tough shoot, and I'm not sure we could have got the footage we needed to know. But if you go to slide 28, they're stuck with us. So we're all up there together, floating around, and we could get close to these guys. And the scientists were really great people to work with. And so we got this amazing story of bowhead whales that we never thought we would get. It was always plan B. But in the end, it became the plan because we didn't end up using the glue stuff. That's how it works.
So we have a question from the audience here. So, in the intervening years, has a Steadicam been developed that would work on a Zodiac, so that would make that beluga whale footage usable?
Yes, there are techniques and technology now. You can pretty much film almost anything anywhere. I mean, we're working with very small packages now. Sometimes SLR, consumer type cameras, GoPros we're working with. We're able to put them on drones now. We're able to do things you couldn't do back in 2013 when we made this kind of when we were shooting this footage. So yeah, there's been huge leaps in technology since then. Now 3D is still a problem. I mean, there isn't a really, really good compact small 3D rig yet that would allow us to do drone work and some of these other things. So you end up shooting these days a lot of stuff in 2D and then doing a conversion. But I'm going to show you the camera we use because this was at the cusp again of, we're going from film, big IMAX cameras, to the digital system, 3D digital. It works in certain situations, but it's not great for everything. Go to slide 24, because there was one camera that was developed, and it was almost like almost a one-off, this camera. It was built by Sean Phillips and his team, and it's a 35 millimeter 3D system. So it's a compact camera. It's two lenses side by side, so you have 3D, but the thing is very lightweight, and it holds two strips of 35 millimeter film that's then put on the side, so you get a wider frame size in it, and it is a really good camera to work in. It has about, I think it has about a 6 or 7 minute load when you are filming, which for us that's better than 3 minutes, and it's 3D from the get-go. So we used that for a lot of this kind of footage because it was so compact. And now we're about to start we actually are in production on a new film with Jane Goodall called Reasons for Hope. And we're into the whole, we need to get cameras in different places. We need to decide if we can get a 3D camera system, that we can film with Namibia, and there's all kinds of technical issues. But, the 3D complicates your life so much. In a lot of productions now, you actually don't shoot that much in 3D. You shoot what you can. A lot of the time, you're going to shoot it in 2D, and the wonders of computers, you can then convert it all to 3D. So it's another, bit of a compromise, because it's not necessarily how you want to go, but everything in our format at some point is probably a compromise.
That's really great. It's funny, it's interesting how you talk about these giant cameras that didn't fit on your crane to the smaller cameras that you could put on a crane. And then there's a whole other topic that we haven't really discussed yet, which was somehow now taking those cameras underwater for the shots with the narwhals and the Greenland sharks.
Yes, well, the thing about our format is because the digital era has caught up to us, that, in the old days, the problem was digital just wasn't good enough for an IMAX screen. It was like HD isn't going to cut it. 2K isn't going to cut it. The cameras that even then were coming along, the Phantoms and those cameras, they're like 4K, good for it, like true 4K cameras. So we were able to get a 4K camera, just a 2D camera, into a housing. It was it would fit into a fairly large housing, but it wasn't a massive amount of camera anymore. It was a manageable amount of camera. It was digital, and underwater is a very forgiving medium. So when you're filming digital cameras underwater, even back in 2013, it's, you can blow that up to full screen and it looks really, really good. Now, is it as good as an underwater IMAX 70mm camera that would have been used in all the reef films and those films in the early days? Probably not quite there, but it's good enough for what we're doing. And then the 3D is, again, something you can do fairly easily with underwater in particular, because it's just that kind of medium that's very forgiving. So the underwater stuff we got up there was done with a digital rig, that we put a 2D digital rig.
I see. Can you tell us a little bit about, since we're on the topic of different filming techniques, the scene with the birds on the cliffs?
Yeah, that's also a big jump that digital cameras allowed us. So we were chasing. So our film, we had the ice bear. We now have the ice whale. Right? We still didn't have the ice people because we didn't know who they were yet. But we wanted to do a story of the ice bird. And the ice bird, to me, is the thick-billed deer, because it's an Arctic breeder. It only survives because there's an ice flow, and they kind of have to live at the edge of the flow. That's how the food source works. So they're really dependent on this, and that's what the theme of the film is. So we decided to try to film the thick-billed deer. And it's they live on cliff edges on Baffin Island and around the Arctic. They're really hard places to get to, and really hard places to film. Well, we found this photographer, and his name's Mike Mail, and he's from Virginia, and he's a wildlife bird specialist. So he shoots tons of stuff of birds. He shoots for these, he shoots for everybody, but he just really is a good bird photographer. And he bumped his camera, he brought it up to a 4K red. So he actually had a 4K camera that he was working with, which is kind of the minimum we could accept. And we sent Mike by himself across Baffin. He came to Pangerton, which is on sort of central southern Baffin. But we wanted to film this bird colony
on this cliff edge, right on the edge, facing out on England. So if you go to slide 5, I'll tell you a picture of my feet. This is one story. You know, if I have a chance to tell it, I'm so proud of Mike. He's just an amazing guy. This is a tough shoot. He's going back. He's a crew of one on our end, and picked up 3 or 4 different 4 Inuit helpers and guides that took him from this near small town. They went down the coast, camped on this little island across the cliff entrances, where there was polar bears coming in at night, and dogs taking the polar bears away. And his job was to cross over and climb these cliff edges to try to film these birds. And it was a really steep cliff. It was full of scree, loose rock. It was really treacherous. And so if you go to slide 30, so he talked his guides into carrying his gear, because he's got a lot of equipment. He's got a lot of heavy stuff. So they all set out in this expedition. And they climbed up to, go to slide 31. They got to the top of the cliff, and it probably took them 6 hours to get to the top of this cliff. And they would start it, of course, their island is offshore, not that far. You can, the shots you see of the cliff in the film are shot from his island. They got to the top of this cliff, and it was the wrong cliff. They couldn't actually see into the bird colony from where they were situated on top of the cliff. They needed to be on a different cliff. To get to that end of the cliff, they'd have to climb all the way down and then scale up a whole other part. So they basically went back to their island and said, I don't know if we can do this. I mean, the guides, everybody's burned out. They're kind of fried. And so we said to Mike, okay, Mike, one way you might be able to talk your guides into going back up this cliff is if we can promise them a helicopter ride off of the top. Because we, at this point, were in Pangerton, which is about 100 miles. It's about an hour and a half helicopter ride away. And we had a helicopter that had come into our aerial. So we had it for a couple of extra days. And so we thought, okay, we'll take the helicopter. We'll fly over. We'll meet these guys at the top of the cliff, because there's no place to land on that island. And we will help them film from the top, and then we will give them a ride to the bottom so they don't have to climb all the way back down. Now, his guides were thrilled because they'd never been on a helicopter, and they thought, okay, this is something that would really be worth the extra effort and pain and suffering to do. So they climbed up this cliff another time on the day we were supposed to come across to meet them. And this is the footage that they got before we arrived. So go to slide 32. Yeah, so they got to the right spot this time, and they were filming, and it was a beautiful day, and you don't get many days like this in the Arctic. This is an exceptional day. All that bird footage you saw was shot basically on one afternoon on this cliff face, and he had the angle. If you go to slide 33, he had the kind of angle with his special camera. He could get right in on these cliff faces, and it went swimmingly. And then we set out in the morning while they were climbing the cliff, out of radio contact. They started climbing. We left our base in Pangerton to go across. And if you go to slide 34, we hit fog and we were grounded. So we had to hit the deck. We were trying to climb a mountain range to get where they are. And we were stuck on the ground, and we couldn't communicate with them. We were there was no radio that was going to work. So we were just waiting there. And we thought, oh, these poor guys, they're going to climb this cliff. They get all this work. They're expecting us to show up to help them get off this cliff. And we're not going to be able to show, and it's going to be a total letdown for them, of course. And then if you go to slide 35, and then about 10 in the morning, it just started to lift. This is what it looked like from where we were. It just started to lift off, and then you go to slide 36, and it opened up, and we lifted off, and we went across. And slide 37 is us coming in to their location, and it was clear on their side for a change. I mean, there was a bit of fog, but it was something we weren't sure we could land when we got there. And we got there, and we landed, and this is Mike coming up to our helicopter, slide 38. This is what he looked like when he saw us land, because they were just so fried. And he saw us come up, and go to slide 39 and 40. We basically spent 3 hours, doing some other filming, because we were able to take the 3D film camera we had. We were able to get the big wide 3D shots you wanted. Mike had all the close-ups. We were able to tell a story. Slide 40, you can see everybody's having a great time. We're all happy. And then the pilot comes up and says, uh-oh, we got to go. The weather's closing in on us. It's socking in, and we don't have time to take these guys back down. And we said, that's not even possible. You have to find a way to get these guys down off this cliff. And he said, we can do it if we can leave in like the next 10 minutes. So we got the guys together. We said, guys, we got to get all our stuff. We got to throw it in the helicopter. And, you know, where do you want us to take you? You know, I mean, like, we can't get to your island because the fog had already moved into where they needed to go. Their island was already fogged in. Where are we going to take you? And the Inuit guys just pointed down into the sound below, and he said, just take us there. And so we said, okay, you know, and the pilot took off and took them down. I said, well, how is your support crew going to know where you are, right? I mean, they're on the island, right, which is a fair ways away. How are they going to know where you went to? You know, like, how are they going to come rescue you with a boat? Because they have to come and get them on a boat. Because we couldn't contact them. We had no way of communicating. He said, don't worry about it. And sure enough, the pilot dropped them on this beachhead down there in the middle of nowhere on the ocean, and came back up and got us in the nick of time when we took off and got out with no problem. I found out later, like 10 minutes after they got there, their boat had arrived. So somehow the guys on the island had figured out, oh, they're not coming here. They're going to be going there. Maybe they heard the helicopter. I don't know. But they were there like 10 minutes, they said, and their rescue boat showed up and picked them up and took them back. So that was one of those stories. You said one guy, basically, one professional with the help of the local people, and ended up with what ended up being probably 6-7 minutes in our film.
That's absolutely amazing. There was a question in our in the comments on the YouTube stream that I think this maybe leads well into, is that it's frigid cold. You're far away from, you know, the nearest city hospital. You're jumping into the water with giant whales, near polar bears. You know, how dangerous is it to make a giant screen film like this?
You know, I get asked this a lot by my wife too. Career, you know, you do, and I think the thing that scares me the most, it's not the bears, it's not the whales, it's the helicopters. You know, like, you do a lot of flying, and you do the kind of flying in a helicopter you really shouldn't be doing if you're being safe, because IMAX shots, the most dramatic shots you'll see are those low flying shots. You're coming over the cliff, you're coming over the land, you're close to the ground, you're doing these maneuvers that if you lose an engine, you're dropping like a stone. And, you know, in the Arctic, I mean, I've actually lost a couple of colleagues and some friends in helicopter crashes in the Arctic. Not on the way through this film. I lost a really close friend during the Bears film. He was a scientist, but it was a typical Arctic helicopter crash. And it's just in bad weather, something happens, helicopter goes down. So the helicopter scares me, but everything else, the animals, you know, it's about having the right people around you. I mean, as the director, I'm a very small part of the team. I mean, I have a place, but really it's the team around you, the guys that understand the camera systems, the Dylan Reeds of the world, and the Sean Phillips and the Mark Poiriers and Reed Smoots, who understand that. So you don't, as a director, I don't even think about the camera, you know. And when it comes to the animals, even though I have a background in biology, I always had the experts, the scientists with me, or in this case, they could be the local guides, the Inuit. You always have people like that around you. So with polar bears, you don't fool around. I mean, you basically, every time you leave camp, you have a guy with a shotgun. Players, you know, you can't walk. It's one of the few places I've ever been to film that you just can't go out and walk around and just, you know, be free. You can't in the Arctic. You have to plan, you have to know where you are, you have to watch the weather, and you got to watch out for, and on the land in particular, the polar bears. So I don't think it's a really, really scary thing to do in terms of the animals, but I'm just helicopters are something that, I don't know. It's not my favorite part of the job, and there's no room even for me. Often the crew has to go up and do some of this without me, and that's just the way it works.
So
it's really interesting.
Yeah, we were hoping for the viewers if you wanted to put where everyone was located in the chat, because I think we have a pretty pan Canadian audience and maybe some international viewers as well. One of the other questions in the chat was wondering if you've ever filmed in Antarctica and how that experience is different than filming in the Arctic.
I have filmed. You know, this film, it went through a lot of iterations. If I'd shown you the storyboard from like 5 years before we actually started filming this film, we actually called it Polar Quest. And the concept at the beginning was a two-pole film. Science North was developing at the same time a traveling exhibit called the Two Poles. So they, you know, had an Antarctic segment and an Arctic segment. It seemed to us to make sense to do a film that had both poles in it as well. And so originally we started out thinking we'll do a Polar Quest. It'll be a bit about the Antarctic. And I went down to the Antarctic. I filmed penguins. I found a fantastic story on the Adelie penguins that I was all over the Antarctic doing different things. I lived with a penguin colony for 2 weeks, and man, the smell of that is unbelievable. And we originally thought we'd be able to do that, but it took us so long to get the money together. By the time we were ready to go, we didn't have enough money to do both because it was so expensive to get to the Arctic to do what we needed to do, and it would have been just as expensive to get all the way down to the Antarctic as well. So we decided to focus, and it was a good thing, really, because I think getting into a little more depth on one place sometimes is better than trying to do too many places. And so in the end, I would have loved to have gone down and made an IMAX because we did a lot of filming and sort of scouting filming down there with penguins and a few other things. And it's as you guys know, I mean, in the films you've seen, some fantastic films have come out of the Antarctic, and it would have been a really interesting concept if I'd had 80 minutes to do a two-pole film. But maybe sometime in the future. I mean, it was an amazing place to get to.
That's just fascinating. So we go from one extreme, you know, filming in the cold like this, and then your previous film to this though was Born to be Wild, which is a favorite of the people from Regina. And so, how do those two, like extreme hot and extreme cold, how do they play against each other, or how do they compare? Is there one that you would prefer to shoot in?
Well, you know, as a Canadian, I'm kind of used to cold. Like it was -10 today in Sudbury in the morning. So, you know, cold is something we kind of, you know how to dress for, you know. And even in the Arctic, we were up there in February to film the ship sequence, and it was -49 with a 100-kilometer wind at one point. So it was like unbelievably cold, and you just dress for it. I mean, you look at the clothing that the Inuit have and the stuff that I mean, there's ways to deal with cold. Hot is a whole different world, especially if you're not growing up in a really hot place. I mean, humidity and hot is, for me, really much harder to deal with. And the shoot that epitomized that was the Borneo shoot with the orangutans for Born to be Wild. And it was a really hot, sloggy kind of shoot. And I actually, at the end of the film, I put together a little video that I sent to you guys about making Born to be Wild. And it's just footage that was, you know, behind the scenes stuff with some of the crew. Put the music by Ronnie Clegg, who's a South African singer-songwriter that I'd worked with in the Jane Goodall film. So I took a piece of his music, and it's called Are You Tough Enough? And that's the piece of the music which seemed to really epitomize what it's like to work in hot. So, I mean, it was Born to be Wild was another one of those experiences you could spend hours just talking about. A fantastic team. Dylan Reed from Edmonton, of course, was a big part of that team, as was David Douglas out on the West Coast. So we had a great team, but it was a hard shoot. So show them the little 3-minute homemade video that I put together that I used the talks for that.
Okay, get stand by for rehearsal, and action, Fred.
To the end of the cycle, here's the fire from heaven. Here's a tired planet closing down. No more news at 11. Somewhere that storm is species has died. Somewhere a child is born. When I hold you, I tremble inside. Can we ride out the storm? Are you tough enough? Can you take the strain? Are you tough enough to walk in the burning rain? Are you tough enough? Can you take the change? Are you tough enough? Baby, just say. Into the heart of the human dream, into a strange new world. Remember me under the tree of man, where I first heard these words. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. 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 What we need is a miracle. What we need is some time. What we need is an angel of mercy in this life. Are you tough enough? Can you take the heat? Are you tough enough to walk in the burning street? Are you tough enough? Can you take the change? Are you tough enough? Baby, just say. Tell me, are you tough enough? Tell me, are you tough enough? Oh, are you tough enough? Tell me, are you tough enough? Baby, just say. Into the heart of the human dream, into a strange new world. Remember me under the tree of man, where I first heard these words. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it. Gonna make it through, I can feel it.
So that's heat, and I don't know if I don't know if there's a hotter place to film in terms of heat and humidity than Borneo, but it was a real slog.
And what about the difference between filming, you know, whales and elephants, or whales and primates? Like, are there differences, or do the same principles apply?
Well, in terms of filming, I mean, wildlife is wildlife. I mean, you have to be in the right place at the right time. You have to, you know, invest in having the right gear and the right team, and you have to have a lot of patience. I mean, in most cases, things aren't going to happen when you want them to happen, and that's especially true with the wild animals. I mean, with Born to be Wild, we were working with animals that people were working with, so it was a little bit easier, a little more predictable. But when it comes to whales, I mean, there's not a lot of predictability in terms of bowhead whale. And wild chimpanzees, where we filmed in Tanzania, the same thing. I mean, they're just going to do what they're going to do, and you have to hope that you're in the right spot. But I'll tell you, that change in camera systems, when you've got that 3-minute load and you're filming, and then often you run out of film, and then something really amazing happens while you're reloading. That's just the way things are going to be. But let's go back to that slide 12, if you don't mind. The IMAX digital system, the Phantom system that IMAX developed, it's a 3D camera. But the really interesting thing about it, it was like a reverse film system. So in most film, I'm sure you guys can imagine what this is like. You pull a trigger and you get 3 minutes and then you're done. With this system, you pull the trigger and you run all the time. You're recording everything in front of you. And when you think something interesting has happened, you hit stop and you get the last 30 seconds. That's the way that system is designed. So it's like an amazing way to film wildlife, you know, because you can't store all that information. You can't just film everything all the time. That's, in IMAX, the massive, you'd have to take 2 plane loads of drives to do that. But with this system, you just have to know when to say stop. And you knew you had the last 30 seconds in the can, and it was ready to go again. In like 30 seconds, you could be back up, and then you get the next 30 seconds. So when you start filming with systems like that, getting wildlife and behavior in the IMAX format just becomes so much easier.
In the chat from Deborah, she's an Inuit viewer, and she would like to know why you chose a non-Inuit voice to voice the film, to narrate the film.
Well, that's an interesting question. I don't think we knew at the time. Probably didn't really have a handle on who could do that kind of narration for us. It would have been a great idea if we thought of it. I mean, we had Tanya Tagak who was singing, so that was very cool. We had the Jerry Cans, the Callowit did music for us, so we sort of covered that off. But yeah, I must say it never occurred to me that we'd have one that would be able to carry the kind of narration that we needed for this film. But it would have been a great idea.
Can you talk a little about the music in the film? Like, I really enjoyed the music in the film. I think it fits the scene, especially like when they're on the dog sled. How you came to choose like particular pieces of music for the film?
Yeah, I mean, music's a tough thing, not tough thing, but it's a fun part. And my background wasn't originally, so I kind of look at music maybe a little differently because I have a bit of experience with it. But that scene in particular, I have a fantastic editor. His name's Lottie. He's edited all the films I've made. He's got really good sensibility when it comes to picture and to story and music as well. And so he'd come across the Jerry Cans somewhere in his research. He'd come across this group called the Jerry Cans, based out of Iqaluit, and he played us a few of the tunes. And we thought, oh my God, this stuff! And it's raw. It's really interesting. They're singing in a Nuktatuk, and they're also crossing over and sing some of it in English. So it was kind of a perfect song for what we were trying to do in that film. And they're a great band. I actually saw them live afterwards at a festival here in Sudbury. They came and did a show, and they did an amazing show. But this is a really happening band.
Go ahead, Darren. You've made some amazing films in your career, and so I'm wondering, what's next? Is there a new project that you're thinking about, or maybe working on now?
Well, if you go to slide number 50, which happens to be the last slide in the deck there, this is a project that we have been developing for, let's say close to 10 years as well. With Jane Goodall, and we did our first film with Jane on chimpanzees it came out in 2002. So it's, it'll be a 20th anniversary if we can bring this film up. But we started developing a film with her about 10 years ago called Reasons for Hope. And, there was just a lot of stuff going on that was negative in the environmental world. There is today. I mean, the climate change in particular. There's a lot of stories out there that there's a lot of doom and gloom. And Jane's philosophy as she travels the world, because she went from being a chimpanzee researcher to basically being a spokesperson for the environment, and traveling at the age of 87. She's actually 87 this month. She used to do 300 days a year on the road talking, and she would basically bring to people what she called a message of hope and a reason for hope, because in her opinion, if you don't have hope, you don't do anything. So she really works hard at inspiring people to make a change. And so we thought we should be able to find enough good news stories around the world to fit her theme of hope, because she has a couple of pillars of that theme. It's the energy of youth and commitment of youth. It's the human brain. It's the resilience of nature. It's the human spirit. So there's some good stories in each of those. So we started developing this film. We actually greenlit it the month the pandemic hit. So last February, we greenlit the film. We finally had all the pieces in place. We said, all right, we're ready to go. We had a schedule. We were going to be in Austria filming the story of ibises migrating over the Alps behind microlights. We had all this stuff set to go, and boom, along comes COVID, and we're not going anywhere. And so we kind of just sat around trying to figure out how the heck are we going to do this film, and what's going to be on the other side of COVID. I mean, are we going to have theaters? Are we going to have whatever? And now we're starting to realize that there will be the other side of this pandemic, and we will go back to something approaching normal again. And so the project just kind of went into gestation, but now we're basically back up, and we're starting to film and plan for a shoot this summer in we're going to be in Austria and Italy this summer filming this ibis story going over the Alps. We'll be in Namibia working with cheetahs. We're going to be in Tanzania working with Jane with chimpanzees again, and a few other stories that we're still kind of putting in place. But yeah, we're going to make Reasons for Hope, and we're going to bring this thing out in IMAX 3D. 2023 is our target right now, which I think is doable. I think we'll be doing some filming this summer, but we'll really get going hard next January, February, and get everything in the can by next fall, and then bring it out. So we're still going. We're still pushing ahead. Jane's still, she's been in an attic in Bournemouth, England, basically in the top floor of her sister's house during this entire pandemic. You're talking about a lady who spent 300 days on the road talking to millions of people, it seems. There's certainly thousands and thousands of people in every walk of life. She's an ambassador of peace. She's everything you can imagine. She's an amazing woman. And here she is stuck in an attic for a year and not being very tech savvy, because she really wasn't. I mean, I would never even email with Jane directly. It's always through someone else. She's had to bring herself up to speed. So she does like 10 Zoom calls a day now in this attic, just talks to people all over the world, does presentations. She's probably as active and out there now as she was when she was on the road 300 days. She's able to do this from an attic by herself in Burma. So she's eager to get on the road too, and we're all eager to get out there and start putting this film together. So that's what's next.
Just quickly, with this pandemic here, what would it have been like filming the Arctic film back in 2014? Like, would you have been able to do it remotely, like you've sort of been working on this film, your new film?
Well, that's a good question. That about the only thing we could film right now. I mean, this last year we could have actually done some filming, probably in Northern Ontario. I mean, out of Sudbury, if we could have got a crew in the Northern Ontario, we could have traveled across Northern Ontario. Although, we didn't have a reason to, but that's about the only thing we could do safely in this last year. So I would say if we had an Arctic film on the go during the pandemic, we'd be in the same boat as any film. It's hard to go anywhere. It's hard to go anywhere safely. Nobody wants you to come there. I mean, the Inuit communities up there were very wary of outsiders coming in. So I don't know if we could have got much cooperation, or if we, could have got a crew safely in there, because your first priority is the safety of the people around you. So I would say we'd be in pretty much the same boat, and trying to find a window to go up to the Arctic to start this film this coming summer, which would probably have been tough. I mean, things are being canceled already all over the place. I mean, we have a music festival in Sudbury every year, and that's already canceled. And, so I would say it would have affected almost any film we wanted to do. So I'm really glad we got the Arctic film done when we did, though. I mean, the ice is going. I mean, it's a film that if you look at it 10 years from now and see the differences in the ice pack and the permanent ice in the Arctic, it's going to be dramatic 10 years from now. And so it's a bit of a record of what things were like in 2012 and 13 when we did our filming.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's wonderful. I think we're coming towards the end of our time, so I would like to take a moment just to thank Darren and TELUS World of Science Edmonton for inviting me from Saskatchewan to be a part of this conversation with you, David. And then I will leave it back to Darren.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you, David, for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank Giant Screen Films for making the film available for everybody to watch today as part of National Canadian Film Day, and all the other Science Centre partners that helped put this on. IMAX Victoria, TELUS Spark in Calgary, Science World in Vancouver, the Ontario Science Centre in Toronto, Science North, the Museum of History in Ottawa, and the Montreal Science Centre as well. Thank you all very much for helping to put this event on. So.
Yep. Well, thanks very much for having me. It's been a bit of a flash in the past. I actually got to see my film again today. I put it back. I put it on DVD here just to refresh myself on some things, and it was fun just to revisit some of these places and some of these stories. So thanks for putting this on.
Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience. I hope we can do this again for future films, maybe Jane Goodall's when it comes out in a couple years. And I personally hope when it's safe, we have our viewers from Edmonton come out to the Science Center and see all the great films we have in the IMAX theater.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. There will be a time when we'll be back.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you for joining us, everybody, tonight. And I hope everybody had a great time. And again, I hope to do this again. So thanks very much.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.